Hi, and welcome to Contercast. My name's Kat Boyd.
And I'm David Jameson.
So, sorry, I absolutely forgot what I was doing there, but that is indicative of exactly what my brain is like right now.
Yeah, mine too. Full core brain by this point.
I mean, I put out a tweet the other day, I don't know if you saw it, where I asked if anyone else was suffering from this kind of like core brain damage that I seem to be suffering badly from. And I got a lot of replies saying, yes, absolutely.
It kind of reminds me of when I was a kid. We went on holiday to France, and the one and only time I ever went to a zoo, we went to this French zoo, and all the animals had gone mad. Right? It was like a carnival of insane animals, right? And the more magnificent they were, the more insane they were. So, like the polar bear and the elephants are especially crazy. And they were just sort of doing repetitive motions over and over again because they've been driven mad by being confined into these artificial spaces. That's kind of what I feel like.
But I think that that's probably the first stage of quarantine is the madness. When I was a kid, I used to, every Hogmanay, I'd go with my dad to the old Glasgow Zoo, which doesn't exist anymore. I think it got shut down for like health and safety and animal welfare concerns.
Mm-hmm.
We went one Hogmanay and there was no, I mean, who goes to the zoo on Hogmanay? I think my mum just wanted us out the house for a couple of hours. We got a tour, like a personal tour from the zookeeper, and he took us into like all the hidden like animal enclosure bits, and I just this have this overarching memory of a very, very sad rhino.
Mm-hmm.
This once majestic beast that would roam the plains of Glasgow Zoo was just, it looked so sad. So I wonder if maybe insanity is the first point, and then just like
You just
real
resigned.
abject horror and resignation at your fate. I don't
Mm.
know what happened to those animals. I don't have a happy ending for that story.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if there is a happy ending, I think zoos are just closing down all over the place,
Well,
aren't they?
the happy ending is that I guess it's now a Beefeater chain restaurant.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So it's supplied by industrial farming. Even more grim. By the way, I should say on that point, I recently watched Michael Moore's new film.
uh-huh.
Um, this is garnering a lot of controversy. It's called Planet of the Humans, and it's basically an attack upon the renewable energies industry um, as useless in terms of environmental protection and is massively destructive. But its conclusion, and you wonder what's going on with some people's heads, its conclusion is Malthusian. Its argument is we need to reduce the population
Yeah.
and basically abandon industrial society, right? Which is going to happen. But the more interesting, the more useful part of the film is that it's if you thought, and you might think that there was a part of capitalism which was moving in a more sustainable direction, it completely busts that bubble. Like it's hilarious. Some of it. It's weird. I'd never even thought of it. So the processes to make solar panels release huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, completely undoing the minimal, energy gathering capacities that it has.
I mean, this happens already, like in Scotland. So when there was the threatened closure of the Bifab yards where they were making the jackets for the wind turbines. What
Yeah,
they're wind turbines, aren't they?
yeah,
When they were making like the sleeves for those like
the
the
blades.
arms.
Yeah.
Yeah, blades. That's what I meant. Um, when the yard was getting closed down, the contract was then going to be, I think it was like going to be Indonesia, I want to
Mm.
say, but like someone calculated the carbon footprint of making those sleeves in Indonesia, transporting them back to Scotland for use in a wind farm, like in Fife. Like
I know.
it would take hundreds of years for this wind farm to cancel out the carbon footprint of the transportation of these jackets.
Yeah, and it also takes on the biomass thing, right? Which is sounds like it's doing something environmentally friendly, and what it's actually just doing is planting trees. That's all biomass means. So oil
Say that again.
is plant life.
You went a little bit Darth Vader there. Tell
Yeah,
me again about biomass.
biomass is just it sounds like an insult, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Biomass is what I'm increasingly becoming in lockdown.
Someone's gonna like roll down their car window one day when I'm jogging past.
Biomass, yeah.
Get a move on, biomass.
Yeah, but that's just burning trees, right? So oil and coal is what happens to plant life once it's been pressurized underground for
Yeah.
millennia or whatever.
Yeah, I know that.
But I find that ironic that the solution to burning that version of like fossilized plant life is just to burn it before it becomes fossils. So do you know what I mean? It's pretty desperate stuff. It's a pretty shocking watch, to be honest, and his, pretty morbid before I watched it, and now I just think, man, this is this is a real mess we're in.
I haven't really watched anything in quarantine for a while because my capacity for concentration is so poor.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't sit still to watch something.
At the start, I was doing loads of reading, and now I'm not. Now I'm just sort of vegetating. But quarantine is going to be getting lifted over the next 3 weeks.
Sort of. We don't really know what's happening yet. I mean, I think it's definitely like busier outside. I think like as people adjust to the measures, people are finding ways to try and, gain some new normality. People are getting into their rituals of, going to the shop and exercising, that sort of thing. And people are, for 7 weeks now have been maintaining the clapping ritual, which we should talk about.
Yeah.
Are you still taking part?
I'm going to be totally honest and say no. Look, my attitude to this whole thing throughout has been, as with any mass popular public response to a crisis situation, it contains elements which are both obviously progressive, like people are joining together to express a mood of public solidarity, with vulnerable groups of workers and so on. But as well as that, it also contained elements of sort of I don't know, a version of national unity which is regressive or whatever, or is trying to basically stamp out any dissent that might emerge during the period, and also just didn't address the reality, the class reality, if you like, of the situation. I'm not saying, by the way, that I'm against people clapping or whatever, but I feel it's gotten to such a stage where the people we're applauding are being cannibalized. Like,
the people we're applauding are dying.
They're dying, right?
They're dying.
And it's starting to feel, I don't know, a bit insulting. That because we now have the highest death rate in Europe, which is the most affected continent in the world. So we have lost. Britain has fucked it more royally than perhaps any other country, and at least by some metrics, that is just the case. And our national political organism, if you like, refuses to recognise it, refuses to accept it. So far, most outlets in the media have simply not reported that fact.
Yeah, I think that the clap. Just saying the clap makes me laugh.
The national clap.
The national clap. I understand the ritual of it. Like when I'm, looking out the window and seeing people do it. It's mostly families, it's a lot of kids, and I understand that it does provide a sense of routine and ritual during a time that's essentially chaotic, and if people are furloughed and kids aren't at school, then there's a lack of like sense of routine. So I do you know what I mean? I'm not saying that people shouldn't clap, like I would be really clear about that, but I mean it's not real action. You know, I remember when, we'd see scenes from Italy. I think that's where it first started. They did this similar thing, but it was also, juxtaposed with these scenes of real horror about what was happening on the ground. Um, people's like real suffering. And I feel like the clapping is it's part of this like enforced national cheeriness, like this kind of like, oh, everything will be okay, stick a rainbow in the window and let's clap for NHS workers. And it's like, yeah, we've got the worst death toll in Europe. Like, where's the reality? And I feel like there's a sense of, this isn't the time for politics. It's time that, we're all, just get behind our, NHS and clap them. I mean, what is a clap if not like something that happens at the end of a performance? Like that's what clapping is, isn't it? I guess it's a gesture of, it could be seen as a gesture of gratitude, but hey, gratitude ain't going to pay the bills for people.
Yeah, and I have seen some people protesting. Like I have seen, there was a whole street in Bristol had a protest for PPE at the time of the clap and stuff like that. So there are like,
there are pockets of it for sure, but there's also the sense of A, if you don't clap, and B, if you try to critique the clap, that you are, do you know what I mean? You're basically a traitor or, part of the problem. I feel like.
Can I say, in all of so I've looked at some of the sort of photo logs that the BBC or the Guardian or whoever have compiled during this period of, the street events, clapping and sing songs and social distance street parties and shit like that, right? And, you can go on the BBC or the Guardian, as I say, or any other newspaper and see 20 photographs of these street events. Every single one of them is a middle class street. Every single one of them is like an upper middle class street, obviously affluent. I'm not saying that's where the clapping is going on. What I'm saying is that's a very curated image of what the country is. It's a very deliberately curated image of. I remember listening to this series about the history of Radio 4, put out by Radio 4, and they were very candid in it and said, Radio 4 represents the English middle class's self-image, and we very self-consciously set out to represent the English middle class's self-image back to itself, because we feel that is the core national identity, essentially. And the British media has always had a project of trying to uphold that core national identity. And if you look at all of the images of the way people have engaged in that, not just the applauding, but all kinds of stuff, street art and musical performances and stuff, it's so painfully that. I mean, you know what I mean? You won't see a single rundown street. And I'm just sort of, I'm fascinated by that as well. A very particular image of the clapping has emerged.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it would be less nippy if at the same time you didn't have Matt Hancock saying this is not the right time to talk about pay rises for frontline workers in the NHS. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think it would be less nippy, but I think that the left, like people like ourselves and others on the left, are going to have to make some very difficult and unpopular arguments around this very soon. Like the nice rainbows and the literally happy clapping, where in other countries, you're faced with like somber faces and the harsh reality presented as much as possible. But we're going to have to make some uncomfortable arguments that the rainbows and the clapping are naff at best, and at worst there are, I mean, this is literally how like the dominant ideology operates. Do you know what I mean? So first of all, like, I mean, how society should work, like what the goals are of the dominant ideology and those in control, is that there's a sense of all in it togetherness, and we're not all in it together. Like, we know that. And the methods by which that ideology works is that, you know, the personal responsibility has now gone beyond the kind of personal responsibility, and it's a like deep individual responsibility, that the worst thing you can do at the moment is to go and sunbathe in a park when you probably don't, when you don't have a garden. If you go sunbathe in the park, you're, you know, really undermining the British fight against coronavirus. Rather than it being like a lack of PPE or no actual plan for, you know, stopping people dying en masse in care homes, no mass testing, and also like this kind of sense of, you know, that extreme individual responsibility is coming out when people are grassing in their neighbors to the police for going out twice a day, or, you know, for not obeying the rules, like that kind of authoritarianism. I think it tells us a lot about how the like dominant ideology of neoliberalism works.
And the other part of that, by the way, has been a total falling away of any holding to public account of senior political figures. Boris Johnson, most notably. I mean, we talked about how his illness was kind of used to protect him from criticism. A kind of, you know, it's proof certain that we're all in it together. Boris Johnson was very sick. It's proof certain we're all in it together that Matt Hancock, who you know, is out clapping on the roof of the, you know, some building or something, right? But also, I kind of didn't want to bring this up, but I'm just going to do it. Now, I'm not right. So yesterday in the Parliament, Neil Findlay asked Nicola Sturgeon a question about why elderly people were getting sent home from hospitals to old people's homes, to care homes, without having been tested for coronavirus. In her answer, in a roundabout way, she accepted that that was a thing that was happening, right? Which is obviously so lethal and dangerous. There have been several care homes in Scotland where almost all of the residents ended up with coronavirus. That is a disgraceful situation. Incredible, actually, an incredible failure by the UK government and by the Scottish government, and not just this government, subsequent generations of governments, where with care homes we've built up a system where people work too long, don't have enough money, are carrying too much of a debt burden to look after their elderly relatives. Elderly relatives have to go into care homes, people are living longer, where I'm not pointing any fingers at any particular care homes, like the ones that have been affected during the coronavirus, but we know that abuse is widespread at these care homes. This is a whole system that has developed over decades, right? So I'm not just apportioning the blame to the governments that are in charge. But Nicola Sturgeon cried when she answered that question. And you know what? Like, I'm sure that, you know, politicians are human beings. I'm sure she is emotionally affected by the crisis. But then she said, don't ask me these questions as though I don't care, right? And that's the bit that annoyed me, because I thought, you caring doesn't change anything. I really object to this kind of thing of like, don't criticize me because I care. Don't criticize me because I have emotions. Using the sort of empathetic equality of human beings to completely remove yourself from a position of responsibility in the situation. And by the way, I'd said that at the time. Can you imagine like the gnashing of teeth and the flailing of arms that would then have happened? Because Scotland is so saturated in this stuff. It's so saturated in the use of sentimentality as a shield to bar away political responsibility. And listen, like, Scotland is one of the worst affected parts of Europe by this virus. And obviously, some of the blame for that falls at the feet of the UK government because of the system that we have. It is ridiculous to say that the responsibility doesn't also lie with the Scottish government. I don't think anyone would seriously make that argument. They just wouldn't talk about it. You know what I mean? They'd share a video of Nicola Sturgeon crying and say, "Don't say I don't care about this." But they interrogate why we have these astronomically high death rates.
I mean, sure. There's nothing really that I can add to that. What you're pointing out isn't just a specific incident relating to Nicola Sturgeon. What I've noticed is a phenomenon in the last, particularly the last 5 years, but it's probably been going on longer than that, where politicians desire to present themselves as like one of the people, to have like a pop idol-esque backstory. The more like difficult and hard, the better. And for that to be used as some kind of political capital or prove their worthiness. I think that's a really bad thing for politics. I mean, I think it gets politicians into a situation where they are less able to be held to account. I mean, you hear it in the sort of, I grew up in a housing estate, or I worked minimum wage jobs, like as a kind of as part of the qualification for the decisions that you make and the things that you say and do. So I think it's much broader than what you say. I mean, I would imagine being in charge right now.
It must be horrific, yeah.
Brutal, not up for it. I mean, I can barely remember like what day it is.
Yeah. I mean, it's a horrible situation. I mean, waking up to those kind of that death toll every day and having to talk about it and and so on. Right, I get it. I just I mean, I think the longer I've stayed in lockdown, the more angry I've become at Scottish politics in general, and the situation that we've found ourselves in. So the other day, and I suppose this will be coming out soon, we were in a podcast with some Welsh comrades discussing these questions, devolution and the coronavirus and how it's all been handled and so on. Since then, some level of divergence. It's become apparent that some level of divergence in the timing of the lifting of lockdown has emerged between England on the one hand and Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland on the other.
Yeah, that podcast isn't going to age well.
No, but to be honest, like I said on that podcast that that really nothing had been done to diverge. But to be honest, I mean, even the divergence we're talking about now is very limited. It's going to be a question of the pacing of the reintroduction of people back into the workforce and so on. It's going to be a difference of degree rather than a difference of policy as such, as far as I can tell so far. But even that, to be honest, just made me annoyed, because I thought, right, you're doing it now, we could have diverged at any point. I know a political calculation was made to not diverge because of the political crisis that would have undoubtedly created between London and Edinburgh. And the fact that we don't have a politics in this country which is prepared for that kind of political crisis. And it's not, again, this is not just a grim reality of life under a capitalist state. In Catalonia, they have been prepared for all of the criticisms that you could make, and you could make a lot of the leadership of the independence movement in Catalonia, which is a centre-right political force, right? The biggest part, or it was at the time. But they still had the wherewithal to organise a really serious confrontation with central state power. And I'm really kind of like straining at the harness of Scottish politics at the moment. It's just deeply infuriating.
I'm going to suggest that that's not a new thing. Like, it might
Yeah.
have, like, that frustration at Scottish politics might have taken on a new dynamic. But I mean, I've been frustrated with politics in Scotland for a lot longer. I think I'm just getting more and more evidence for those
Yeah.
frustrations, you know? Like, I think it was dead noticeable when, you know, people like ourselves on the left were complaining about the lack of divergence, that Richard Leonard was talking about how the Scottish government shouldn't be divergent and it should be a four nations approach. And you know,
Pathetic.
that's the
Yeah.
TUC's line. It's bananas. It's totally bananas. I mean, it's clear that the Scottish government, like, are to the left of the UK government in policy terms. Like, there's no denying that. So why would you not, like, argue for the maximum things that you can get from that government to protect the maximum number of people? The other thing that's driving me bananas is the heroes narrative. The heroes,
Yes.
the heroes
Yeah.
are our NHS angels and heroes. I mean, I know plenty of people who work in the NHS. The jobs that they do are hard. They are chronically underpaid, often chronically understaffed, in ordinary times. Like, I mean, if you can call a decade of austerity ordinary times, I don't know, but they're now doing those jobs in extraordinary circumstances without any, like, without decent PPE. There's still, like, loads of gaps with PPE. It's a, do you know what I mean? It just makes me fucking angry when I see happy, like, oh, human spirit news stories about some school child printing off masks on their 3D printer. Like, is that what this has come to? And then, like, NHS workers being told that they are heroes. And I'm not sickened by that narrative, because they're not like, or that I think that they're bad people. It's because I think that is a deliberate construction promoted by the government and the media to talk about public sector workers, particularly NHS workers, as vocational subjects. So people who do things because they, you know, really feel and love this job and want to make a difference. Now, I don't doubt that's why a lot of people go and work for the NHS. People know that it's low paid, that it's hard work, that it's understaffed. People know that, and they go into it to think they can make a difference. I think for a lot of people that I've spoken to, then the reality hits and it's like, wow, this is systematic. This is a giant systemic issue about austerity. And that this heroes chat, just, to me, it says people do this out of the goodness of their hearts. People step up to the plate of the goodness of their hearts, and they're not going to get a pay rise, and they won't get proper PPE, and they're collateral damage, like, in the government's war rhetoric. Like, it's a mess. It's a mess, and it's just incredibly frustrating.
I see this as just another way to evade responsibility. If a hero dies, inevitably
It's in battle, and it's part
it's
of the
martyrdom.
fight. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and you don't have to treat them as a casualty, which is what they are, and you don't have to treat them and all those people who are overworked. I mean, mental health problems among nurses and stuff must be appalling at the moment. All of that damage that's going on, all that trauma that's going on. I mean, there must be thousands of people newly traumatized by this situation, right?
Yeah.
But all of that becomes a necessary sacrifice rather than a public policy disaster, which is what it is, rather than a public policy failure on behalf of
It's
the
criminal
powerful.
negligence. That's what we
Yeah,
need to call it. It's criminal negligence that
yeah,
people on the front line are dying. Like, it is, and someone has to be, or institutions like the government have to be held accountable. And the longer this heroes narrative or angels narrative drags on, the less likely that is to happen. So to NHS workers who might be listening, this is not because we don't appreciate what you do. It's because we believe, like most of you probably do, that the government should be held accountable for what they have
yeah.
done, or what they've not done.
And by the way, you know, there's capacity idling. Like, as we speak, the private healthcare system has not been converted over as it could have been into the National Health Service. Every step of this way, even when some of that stuff was done, even when companies have been brought into supplying PPE or private healthcare has given over some of their capacity, it was negotiated, it was paid for, there were deals done, right? Deals were getting cut with giant corporations while nurses went without PPE and while patients went without hospital wards, right? Honestly, that to me is just disgusting. I think in a situation of a national emergency, like the entire nation accepted that we couldn't go and hang out in the park or in the pub or at the cinema or whatever anymore, right? The state pushed itself into the public sphere and said, sorry, we're confiscating a lot of your liberties, right? And some of those are profound, by the way. Some of those things are our right to demonstrate, our right to go in industrial action, our right to vote. In this pandemic crisis, billions of people have been denied votes that were coming their way, right? So these are big things, right? But you have to say, in a state of crisis of this scale, of course you want there to be a society that can act in that way. I might not necessarily like it to be the state that's doing it or the way it's being done in this regard or whatever, but that's an inevitable thing. It's childish to think it isn't. Why don't those same rules apply to the huge corporations which are failing to supply PPE, are failing to hand over their excess capacity? Why doesn't the state act with the same veracity? At the end of the Second World War, 75 years since VE Day, it was completely the other way around. When the state went to people with demands, they went to the heads of industry. You know what I mean? You know, when 20% of the commanding heights of the economy was nationalised during the war and in the years afterwards, it was seen as the state's special prerogative to talk to huge productive forces and say, because it's a crisis, I decide you do this now. Now the balance is after decades of neoliberalism, the balance is just so completely different. And these massive corporations are the ones whose, it's like this weird distortion of like the ideas of some liberal thinker like Mills or something like that. The rights of individuals are easily curtailable. The rights of corporations, not so much. You know, it's such an ugly bastardization of that kind of liberal attitude. I mean, it's a very telling one. It's very telling.
I think you're hitting on a point about, you know, the state intervention after the Second World War, going to heads of industry, like going to those captains of industry in order to like forward certain demands. But under neoliberalism, like there's a multitude of reasons that's not going to happen, but one that I see is very much a psychic problem, and in terms of the impact that neoliberalism has had on like the population psyche, which is that the state will no longer look to, you know, social forces, like be it like the church or the unions or heads of industry, in order to, you know, placate the population or give the population their demands. What will happen is that there will be a sort of like a kind of self-care narrative. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is your responsibility to look after yourself. You know, it's part of that, like, the culture of narcissism, that people achieve salvation not through making demands of capital, making demands of the state, but instead being told repeatedly that through therapy and self-care that you can gain a personal improvement, or you can manage your mental health, or you can gain mental health. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, do you know, I was going to say this, Stu, because I know this is like a major area of interest to you, the whole self-care thing. I don't know if you saw this, but the Labour Party, so obviously under Keir Starmer, the Labour Party doesn't really do politics anymore or criticism. You know,
Sorry, can I just do a sidebar on this? Have you seen Keir Starmer's clapping video?
Is he totally robotic? And I've not seen it.
I mean, it's the most insincere thing you've ever seen. It's Keir Starmer clapping, right, for the cameras, and then he goes, "Is that you got enough now?"
Oh God, that's not a good look.
I mean, beautiful.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, so Labour Party comms have started putting out self-care messaging. So they put out a graphic which was like someone like wrapped in a blanket meditating, right? Like a little cartoon. And it said things to do to kind of help you through the crisis. And it was things like read a book, take time to do mindfulness or meditation or whatever. And that to me was like it was really scary. Like, I mean, I follow all the kind of, because I'm supposed to be a journalist. I follow all the comms accounts of all the parties, right? The sea change in labels is hilarious and very creepy, right? So on the one hand, Keir Starmer is now openly saying, I won't criticise the government because I see that as inappropriate in a time of national crisis. So what has he got left to say? What he's got is to tell people who are supposed to be depending on a political opposition to read a book or, drink a warm mug of hot chocolate or, take a night out for yourself or whatever. It's awful, man. It's so bad. It's so degenerated. And the thing that struck me about all that is, do you know that self I always remember back to school, and it was in one of those pastoral and social education classes, right, which are always hilarious, right? And one of the things they taught us once that was when you were stressed out, right, at school or wherever, you should adopt this kind of turtle position, right, where you put your head and your head in between your arms and cover your head, right, and just say, "I'm in my turtle position now, right? So I don't want to be involved in whatever's going on." And I remember actually saying to the teacher at the time, have you any idea how badly bullied you would be if you ever actually did that? That would not put you in a less stressful situation. But
that just protects your head from the beating that you're getting.
That just protects your head from the inevitable punches and kicks that would then pile up on you. But the thing is, that kind of mindfulness and stuff, you see articles like this in The Guardian and stuff all the time, like when it's okay for you just to time out and things like that. So if you're at work and you're really stressed, listen, in an ideal world, I think this should be the case. If you're really stressed, you can just say, sorry, I can't hack this, and going home, right? But I just think, what world are you people living in?
Like, but that's not what's happening in workplaces. What's happening in workplaces is that employers are promoting the same stuff. Employers are promoting meditation and mindfulness. And I do think that meditation as part of like a practice is a positive thing, right? But I mean, it's been completely marketized as well. I mean, this is something that's existed for as long as humans have existed. The idea of meditation, it's an ancient practice, mostly associated with like a religious or spiritual belief, which it has become completely decoupled from, and it's been adopted, as I see, by real like tech bro. I mean, it's Silicon Valley. It's like the Californian ideology that we've talked about before on the pod. But to hear that the real opposition are now promoting this as a strategy I mean, it's sick. I actually think that's sick. Like, what we need, I mean, imagine Corbyn was in charge right now and able to just stand at the dispatch box and say repeatedly, where's the PPE?
Yeah.
Where's the fucking PPE?
I know. Can you imagine if Corbyn had put that out? Do you know what I mean? Meditate and shit.
But this is, I mean, Corbyn...
He never would have.
Yeah, but he did put out this... And this is... I never really liked this kinder, gentler politics stuff.
Oh, God. Well,
you remember that?
The hiding to nothing.
Yeah, that kinder... I mean, people don't want like a kinder, gentler politics. No. People want agency. And like, do you know what I mean? People need a squad. They need honors. Honors. That's what people need. Like, this is a fight. Like, and whether we don't want to see it as a fight or not doesn't change the substantive fact that there is a huge conflict of interests between the rich and the poor, between capital and labor. Like, you know, you can't take away from that is the material reality of the situation. So we can put rainbows in our windows all we want. We can continue to clap all we want. If it makes you feel better, then fire in. But like, it can't take away from the fact that this is a there is a war going on, and it's not just against coronavirus. There's a war going on, and only like one side is going to win, and that's really what politics is about. It's about who wins and who loses. Yeah, part of that is like morals and values, but really, if we want to make radical change, then we have to be able to win politically.
Yeah.
Shouldn't have read all that Machiavelli.
Yeah.
Me and David are in a Gramsci reading group. It's been good.
Yeah, it's been well worth it to kind of chew over contemporary events.
I also wanted to talk about Ben's article that we've got on the website, www.conter.co.uk.
Yeah, that's the World Wide Web.
Do you remember the Widdy Web?
The Widdy Web?
Widdy Web.
No.
You never heard of Widdy Web?
No.
It's the name of Anne Widdecombe's website.
Oh, that I find her hard to hate, man. Do you know what I mean? She's just one of these people. She's so obviously just unhinged that hard to dislike.
I don't know if it's still there, but yeah, she had a website called the Widdy Web, and it was like full of pictures of her cats. Some broad man, old Anne Widdecombe.
Yeah. So, this is Ben's article about, I'm not going to try and pronounce the economist's name, but
Kalecki.
He wrote a famous essay about unemployment in the 1940s and queried, I suppose, I don't really know much about the history, but it's a pretty standard, if you like, Keynesian argument about coming to grips with why the ruling class doesn't want something which, under most circumstances, they should want: full employment, the full mobilization of human resources in the economy. You would have thought.
I mean, I think that the main point that Kalecki makes is that the economic arguments for full employment they're obvious. Like the economic arguments are essentially one, and that it's political ideological opposition to full employment on the grounds of a dislike of state intervention, a dislike of public spending, and a deep-rooted dislike of the social and political consequences of full employment, and what would happen to ultimately, in Ben's article, he talks about it as like class consciousness in the event of full unemployment, when labor power becomes so strong under full employment.
You're no longer afraid of the sanction of being sacked.
But like, what's interesting about Ben's article is that he takes that position that Kalecki outlined, that the social position of the boss essentially is undermined, and the class consciousness of the working class would expand. There would be strikes for wage increases, and then strikes for improvements at work, and that would create political tension. And the ruling class, their instinct tells them that that's not desirable. And the unemployment, having the quote reserve army of labor, it's an integral part of the capitalist system. But Ben takes that and talks about, like, is that still a relevant analysis in today's world? And actually, there haven't been a lot of discussions about full employment as a demand, coming out of this crisis. In fact, I see way more people talking about a UBI than saying full employment, like a guaranteed job for a livable, decent wage for anyone who wants it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting as well. I think that's partly a legacy of and what appears at this point. It's still hard to say. It's still early days, I suppose, in this development. Automation has not so far had the consequence of the destruction of jobs. So one of the things about UBI is that it emerged from a kind of thought world in some parts of left-wing academia where widespread automation was inevitable and imminent. And this, I kind of respect this instinct in a sense that the change in the labour market should not lead to mass unemployment and the redundancy of large areas of the workforce. And instead, we could use this as a way to reimagine humans' productive relationships. You supply them with what they need, and then people can go and do things like volunteer in their community or become artists or whatever, right? But it's not transpiring. It's not happening. And I mean, there's some discussions out there about why that is that are rather too involved, and I don't entirely understand. Economists are trying to explain why that's not really happening. I mean, one is the really basic stuff. So, like, I think people always had this attitude that it would be low-paid jobs that were automated, but middle-class jobs. A lot of middle-class professional jobs are much easier to automate than working-class jobs in the modern economy. A robot or a computer can't be a waitress or a nurse or a bin man or etc., right?
I tell you, like on my hobby horse of civil servants, there was a ONS study into automation that put 50% of like government and national administration jobs, aka like civil servants, at risk. 50% of them, because they can be they can probably be done at some point by algorithms.
Exactly. I mean, think about a job like an accountant.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, think about a lawyer. Imagine a computer that understands intimately all of the sort of chess moves that could be made in a court of law.
And that's possible. It's possible to do that. So I mean, the big surge in automation is happening in like agricultural economies, like automation and farming. Like that is actually having a marked economic impact. But the big shift in terms of, you know, job losses is still manufacturing to servicing. That's still a bigger economic impact, particularly in like the United States.
Yeah.
Although I don't know, what does that look like with the level of unemployment that's going to exist after coronavirus? And I think this is where Ben's article is dead interesting. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I believe that the official US unemployment rate is now well above 30 million.
Yeah.
But that the thing about the US labour market is it's so poorly regulated, and there's such a large area of like undocumented labour as well, that the figure is almost certainly much higher than that.
Yeah. I mean, higher. For the UK, there are some economists that are predicting like a third, like 30, like around about 30%, 33% of the economy, like
which
economic
is the Great
actors,
Depression.
Which is the Great Depression. So this is why, like, I think Ben's article is important, because I mean, what, like, the Tory government are going to have to deal with this. So whilst, in one sense, there's still that, you know, unemployment as a factor of capitalism, you know, as that being their politics, like, to try to deal with that degree of unemployment is going to need direct state intervention. The thing that's most obvious to me about the Kalecki's analysis that doesn't really fit is that when there have been like high periods of employment, so that's what we're told now, is that we have, like, you know, a decent degree of employment
before this crisis anyway.
Before this, pre-crisis, is that there hasn't been strength in labor power. You know, you've had like massive amounts of in-work poverty. Wages have stagnated since 2008. And the secret of success for the ruling class in suppressing wages with high employment is that jobs were precarious. So that threat of being out of work was, it still is, even more now so, is really strong, and that lots of people were employed, but lots and lots of people were employed in low quality, low paid, precarious private sector jobs with no trade union collective bargaining coverage and really weak rights.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is obviously it's the way in which the labour market was restructured during the austerity years is really interesting.
Mm.
Some of the stuff, I mean, the bogus self-employment stuff is just the most crazy part of it. I mean, there are loads of jobs out there that basically don't exist, that aren't drawing an income. I mean, there's some really weird stuff going out there because of Tory social engineering, because of their desperate attempt to prove that we're a nation of entrepreneurs. They've just cooked up a body of ludicrous schemes, which are totally irrational, um, and which have left millions of people out of pocket. I mean, if you were to believe the official statistics, you'd probably believe there was something like 7 million registered small businesses in the United Kingdom or something. The real figure is much smaller than that. And of the small businesses that do exist, so many of them are
Yeah.
unviable.
This is the big risk, I think, for the vast majority of ordinary people, is that the Tories will let this rip. Like, they will let it just like roar through the economy to, you know, clear out zombie firms and all. Do you know what I mean? Like, that will be part of their considerations for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
But like all of the and it's not just the Tories, you know, it's bigger than that, but like all of the current like neoliberal state method of operation, the way that the central bank is used to intervene like near on a near permanent basis, and globalization, all of that is under such strain now. The idea that, you know, GDP can continue to grow through private credit expansion, do you know what I mean? Like, that's when that stops, like, how is the government going to deal with the fallout of that? So, I mean, even the Institute of Fiscal Studies is talking about New Deal type economics, like mega intervention on a non-profit making basis. So I mean, I think that there's a lot to be explored in Ben's article.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting intervention into the current state of the economy. And I think it's one of those areas where the left isn't really up to speed yet on the scale of the changes.
Well, how could we be, you know, given that we've now got real opposition?
Yeah.
I just think that like these calls for UBI, like I think there's a wider debate to be had on that. And, you know, talking about UBI, fine, right? But that's honestly not a serious answer when you're talking about a third of people in the UK unemployed.
Yeah,
We
and
need,
actually,
yeah,
even if that UBI was set at a reasonable-ish rate, right? Like it was 800 quid a month or something, and I don't think that's going to be on the table. That would, to lose a third of jobs and replace that with, say, 500 to 1,000 quid worth of handouts is not a transfer of, it's not like for like. I mean, the average income in Scotland, I think, is 24,000 or 25,000
yeah,
pounds a year. So to trade that in for a handout of very much less a month is not it's not a just situation. I think people are a little bit too overawed by this idea of the universality of UBI. Yeah, I get that, but we have to think about how much wealth and power our class currently has before we decide
yeah.
what we're giving away and letting go.
Well, this is, I mean, I have my own questions of UBI, but one of the main things that it says to me is that it gives the working class absolutely no power or control. No power or control. And that to me, like, is a fundamental flaw of it. But I mean, that is a whole can of worms that we probably don't have time for at this pod. But let's put it on the to-do list for the next one.
Sure, let's do.
Is there anything you would like to say finally?
No, I think we're done. I think we're about 1 minute from another Zoom call we have. It's grim, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I keep wanting to do like a Jerry Springer style sign off.
Oh, does he do a little monologue at the end?
Jerry
What was
Springer?
planned? I mean, I probably
No,
watched
he
it.
always just said, take care of yourself and of each other. Self-care of yourself.
Yeah.
And
Fall to
forget
your
about the
stars.
others.
follow Keir Starmer's advice, wrap yourself in a blanket, drink
Adopt the
a,
turtle position
adopt the turtle position, and forget about all the dying nurses.
and only clap when the cameras are watching.
Only clap when the cameras are watching. Yeah.
See you next week.
See you next week.